Welcome into Week 8's matchup preview that Jeff Bell and I do every single week. We're coming at you live this morning as opposed to pre-recorded. We just figured, this is a timely episode. We're talking about the injury reports that came out on Thursday evening, so why not get them to you first thing Friday morning? Of course, we don't have the Friday practice reports yet, so there's going to be a little bit of speculating with some of these injured players as to whether we expect them to play or not. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Jeff, heck of a game last night. I don't know about you, but my heart was kind of breaking by the end of that game. Like every time Carson Wentz hit the turf, you could just see the pain and anguish on his face. It made for a pretty tough watch in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, sometimes we get some of these games, and it seems like we've been getting them more frequently across the league with some of these offenses across the league. That's probably something that I want to dive into throughout today. But the Chargers, they came in struggling. They had lost 3 of their last 4. They looked really tough, or they looked really poor last week against the Colts. The Colts obviously surging. Really, the 3 of the last 4, that one was Miami. And, that might be one of those teams that I want to talk about later. But we saw them last night look very, very good, took advantage of the Viking situation. And Minnesota is finding themselves at a crossroads. There's major questions probably now about J.J. McCarthy and what's going on here, because is it the injury? Because he's been cleared to be the emergency quarterback? Is there something else going on?
Did you see the play where there was a tackle that went out of bounds and McCarthy kind of nimbly just got hit in the ankle and was able to hop over the defender and celebrating the first down after the fact? They are very clearly just kind of keeping him on ice right now. And I get it. You want to put him in a position to succeed. If he's not at 100%, if he's not feeling confident in that ankle, you don't want to put him out there. But at a certain point, you just got to let him play too.
I thought it was interesting. Our fearless leader, Joe Bryant, shared an article about quarterback development. I think it was about a week ago. And Kevin O'Connell was quoted throughout that article. Kevin O'Connell basically saying he thinks the league throws out quarterbacks far too early, doesn't allow quarterbacks to develop. And I was like, well, this is really timely that we've got these Kevin O'Connell comments inside this article as we are looking at this JJ McCarthy situation. And that maybe adds a layer of context onto what's going on with JJ McCarthy.
Yeah, and you talked about it last week that there are just a handful of fake teams in the NFL, and I don't think that's where we are with the Minnesota Vikings. But last night it was just a clearly imbalanced game, and I think the biggest takeaway for me is just that this offense is so much better when they have Joe Alt. I mean, we saw him firing on all cylinders for the first 3 games of the season. Then Joe Alt goes down. Then they start struggling mightily over the next few games. Joe Alt is back last night. They look just like they were beforehand. Last question I have before we move on to the Week 8 matchups for you, Jeff. I know you're a big Quentin Johnston fan. You are also a big Oronde Gadsden fan. So how do you feel last night, seeing this Oronde Gadsden breakout is continuing to snowball, but now it feels like it's coming at the expense of Quentin Johnston? Do you expect that to maintain, or do you think this was just kind of a game plan thing?
I think we need to do a lot better job of recognizing injuries and the impact that injuries have on player performance, because Quentin Johnston was hurt prior to the season, kind of came back, had a really strong 5 weeks or so, and then he was hurt, missed a game 2 weeks ago, was able to catch a touchdown last week. But I think that injury plays into the game planning around there. And really, when you look at the matchup, 2 things to look at. And really, that's what this entire show is: injuries and matchups. And the Vikings have been very good against wide receivers. Quentin Johnston attacking downfield a little bit more, especially with Gadsden kind of stepping in and able to take some of those short to intermediate attention out of the tight end position and utilizing that position. You're going up against a Minnesota defense that's known for sending exotic blitzes, and it's just probably not stacking up for a Quentin Johnston game. Quick turnaround on Thursday night game after missing that week with injury 2 weeks ago and playing on Sunday. So I think when you start stacking up, I mean, I was much lower than on Quentin Johnston than consensus coming into this week. And the reality of it is the reason why we invest in some of these deep, high potential pass offenses is because there's the potential for high ceilings. Along with that, when you have multiple players, there's also the potential for floor games.
Let's go ahead and jump into
wide receivers too. I do want to say on the wide receivers too. Ladd McConkey was declared dead, a bust through week 4, and then I think if you were to look at the numbers, he's been pretty good the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. I mean, we saw it in that first game without Quentin Johnston. He had that game-winning catch and run to set up for the field goal. And since then, it just seems like Ladd McConkey is back out of the box, back to the player that you drafted him to be. So we love to see that. Week 8 matchups, though, and first of all, we'll start with the buys. We've got a ton of buys this week and a ton of impactful buys of some of the best players in fantasy football. Arizona Cardinals, Detroit Lions, Jacksonville Jaguars, Las Vegas Raiders, Los Angeles Rams, and Seattle Seahawks. So, Jeff, I know you and I were very big on the Lions and Seahawks offenses and the Rams offenses. So this is made for a very fun exercise. I'll just put it that way, trying to get lineups set this week. But let's go ahead and jump into the games. First one, Miami Dolphins at Atlanta Falcons. And as always, what we do on this show, for anybody new tuning in today, we kind of use the injuries as a jumping off point to start the discussion. And right now we've got Jalen Waddle, a rest limited practice on Thursday, but no indications that he won't be ready to play. Tua Tagovailoa, he's been dealing with this left thumb injury all year, practicing in full as of yesterday, though, so no concerns there as well. Darren Waller placed on IR with a pec injury. Just kind of speed running with the Darren Waller experience here, coming out here, just dominating for a handful of weeks and then out for a handful of weeks. Darnell Mooney for the Falcons is limited at practice, still dealing with this hamstring injury that he's been plagued with for the last few weeks now. Tyler Algier limited with a hip and a knee, and then Michael Penix limited with a knee injury as well. But we don't have any indications that these guys for the Falcons won't be ready to go. So, Jeff, looking at this matchup, I think this is one of those we've kind of talked about the Dolphins being for lack of a better word, a fake team. This is a team where, we see offenses just kind of toying with the Dolphins when they're out there. And this is one where I don't think you have to big brain it at all. Bijan Robinson is like the number one guy. And I think even if you are looking down for a flex play, I think Tyler Algier, knowing that they can really just blow the doors off this game early, even Tyler Algier kind of has some flex appeal as this game script should benefit him.
Yeah, I think if you're looking at matchups, there are certainly better teams in the league than the Falcons, but when you look at where the Dolphins stand right now, the Falcons are a pretty brutal matchup for the Dolphins. We know how bad that run defense is, and you're coming in here with Atlanta would probably like nothing more than to get back to establishing the run after a difficult game against San Francisco. Atlanta was riding a high going into last week after what they did to Buffalo on Monday night, and then they have that disappointing primetime spot with San Francisco. A little bit of extra motivation, get back rolling. And then when you're looking at the Dolphins offensive side, you've got Jeff Ulbrich has been bringing just blitz after blitz, just very exotic blitz packages from this Falcons team. And so when you've got a Dolphins team that nothing looks on the same page, and then you're running into this matchup that's been very, very difficult to pass against, and it's going to be a recipe for disaster, I have a feeling, in this game.
So we've also seen that Tua Tagovailoa has really been struggling, and Mike McDaniel seems, I don't know if confident's the word, but he's saying the right things. Might not mean it, but like he's saying that he still believes in Tua Tagovailoa, that there's no even thought of switching quarterbacks. But we did see Tua get benched last week at the end of the game when Quinn Ewers came in. We've seen Tua throwing more interceptions than he has ever thrown in his career before. What do you think is the plan here? Because you start looking at the money. I mean, even next year, Tua Tagovailoa, if they were to let go of him, they'd owe $99 million in dead cap. It just feels like they're kind of shackled to this contract for the next 2 years, for better or worse, right?
Well, I don't know. We've seen teams get out of similar, worse, maybe.
I think 87 million, I think, is the record, right? I think that's what the Broncos ate when they moved on from Russell Wilson. I think 87 is the current record. 99 million would be quite a lot of money.
Yeah, and I mean, the Dolphins are operating as if either you might have been in a situation before, or you've seen people in a situation before that they don't necessarily like their job. They put that 2-week notice in, and they might physically be there for the remaining 2 weeks. But I feel like that Dolphins organization right now is just operating at that level of the 2-week notice is in. You're going to keep paying me. I'll keep showing up because you keep paying me. And that's about where we stand, I think, right now with the Dolphins. But I think more to the point, one of the things, I kind of mentioned coming into this, some of these matchups and what we've seen the last couple of weeks, looking at the Jets-Broncos game 2 weeks ago, that London game, looking at the Chiefs-Raiders this past week, where the Chiefs were really able to shut it down at halftime. I really don't want to be at the place of thinking, well, like the Falcons are just going to score too many points. I don't want their players. Like, that's not what I think. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing some of these game plans are able to be ultra conservative. These kickers are able to hit field goals from 60 yards out. You're getting some of these games where the way the Broncos and the Jets operated, the Broncos kind of seem like as long as we have a 4-point lead, it's insurmountable against this Jets offense. So as long as we don't screw it up. And so that's when you get into trouble of saying as long as we don't screw it up. And I think that there should be probably some red flags on the passing games in some of these games where we got the Falcons coming in. They would love to just roll it up on the ground against the
Mhm.
Dolphins. If the Dolphins aren't competitive offensively, they've got no motivation at all to go to the air. And I think that we need to start to take a hard look at some of these games. We saw last week so much consternation about the Patriots and Ramondre Stevenson against the Titans, but really they probably looked at that as the run game has struggled. This is a great opportunity against a team that we don't think is going to threaten us offensively. Let's get the run game rolling. And I think that's, you got to take that into consideration. That said, we've got 6 teams on buys. You got to play like your guys if you got them.
Yeah, and we're not saying like to bench Drake London, but I do get
Right.
what you're saying. They might just come out and say, "Hey, we're just going to run this ball, get out of here as quickly as possible. Let Bijan do his thing in the first half, Tyler Algier do his in the second half." So yeah, like what we talk about in regards to rankings isn't always actionable. I mean, like on a normal week, I'm putting Drake London at like the wide receiver 2 to 5 spot. This week, I've got him at wide receiver 7. That doesn't mean you're benching Drake London, but I think that the expected ceiling in this matchup is just a little bit lower than what you've seen so far. Anything else with this game before we move on to the next one, Jeff?
Nope.
All right. Chicago Bears and Baltimore Ravens. This is one with a lot of impactful injuries that we are keeping an eye on right now. Cole Kmet has a back injury and has yet to practice this week. DJ Moore dealing with a hip injury. Didn't practice Wednesday, but he was back on the practice field yesterday, albeit in a limited capacity. We expect him to play, but we'll kind of see how that turns out after today's practice. Roshan Johnson, also dealing with a back injury, has not practiced this week. DeAndre Swift didn't practice Wednesday with a groin injury, but was limited yesterday, so he should be out there. Lamar Jackson is the one that we're watching really closely here. Back-to-back limited practices. We know that they really want him back, sitting at 1-5 right now. They do not want to fall to 1-6. But with that quick turnaround next Thursday, we're still kind of waiting and seeing what he's going to able to do at practice today. Zay Flowers, he's on the injury report with a shoulder injury, but he's been practicing in full, so no concern there. And then DeAndre Hopkins missed yesterday's practice with an illness, but he should be good to go on Sunday. So, Jeff, I think anytime we're talking about this game, we really need to start with Lamar Jackson. That's really kind of the sliding doors moment here. Like if Lamar Jackson can play, this is a great matchup. We're firing Zay Flowers up with confidence. We're excited for Derrick Henry with that dual threat out of the backfield. If we're looking at another Cooper Rush or a Tyler Huntley start, that's when we start, tempering expectations for everybody on the Ravens, to put it nicely.
Yeah, exactly. It's the Ravens are almost the mirror of, we've got one element here that is an elite high end offensive team, and we've got the other one that, we've seen Dennis Allen have very aggressive blitz packages with the Bears as the defense coordinator, undressed the Saints a little bit last week. That allows for big plays on the back end, so you could still get there with Zay Flowers, but it's night and day difference in this matchup because you could have one, I think, without Lamar Jackson in there, and we've seen the Bears' willingness to lean on the run game the last couple of weeks. And, we only cover the offensive injuries in this, but I would have to imagine the Ravens defense is probably still pretty banged up given where they stood the last couple of weeks. That's the other part of the problem for the Ravens is their defense was not really good when they were healthy, and it's been really injured. And we've seen the Rams were able to take advantage of it a couple weeks ago and in another game script where the Rams didn't feel like they had to put too much on tape because going up against Cooper Rush in that matchup, if you've got Lamar Jackson out there, you got to bring everything you've got because we know how explosive that can end up being.
And, I'm glad you talk about that with the defense because I've heard a lot of talk about like this is a good, scary Bears defense. But you're right. Like they attack so aggressively that it does open for big plays. We're playing in a very different NFL nowadays where so many defenses are content to play this bend don't break sort of offense or defense where they'll put that cap over the top. They don't want to give up the big plays, but they'll consistently give up those 4 to 5 yard plays underneath. And that is the complete opposite of what the Bears are doing. They're putting 8 players in the box. They're really trying to disguise who's going to be blitzing and who's going to be dropping back in coverage. And it makes for a lot of interceptions and fumbles and sacks. But with that, we also see the big plays, 2 touchdowns for Chris Olave last week. So I think that there's concern overall about what this offense might look like. But I think when you're looking at a Zay Flowers or Derrick Henry, you can still count on them to hopefully rip off a big play. Derrick Henry is the one that I do want to talk about, though, because we've seen like the best way to slow down Derrick Henry is to get a hand on him in the backfield. If he gets a full head of steam running through that line of scrimmage, it's really hard to bring him down. And we have seen ever since Cooper Rush or Tyler Huntley last week, I mean, he's getting 8+ guys in the box on 50, 60, 70% of his rushing attempts in any of these given games. And it has really taken the top off of his value here. So looking at how aggressively this Bears defense plays, combined with what we've seen Derrick Henry has really struggled with, is this somebody that maybe, I mean, again, like we're not talking about benching Derrick Henry. It's still Derrick Henry, but are you maybe looking at him as more of like a middling RB2 in this matchup if Lamar Jackson can't be out there?
Yeah, I think you can look at it both sides, though. If Lamar Jackson's not out there, you can see the scenario and kind of what we saw in their last game was basically Lamar Jackson's not out here, especially if it's Tyler Huntley, them just leaning very hard on the run game and basically saying, do or die, we're going to lean on this run game. We're going to keep stacking it on because that's our best outcome offensively without Lamar Jackson out here. So I think that you can make a case. It's one of those scenarios you can make the argument regardless of the direction that you want to make the argument, because you're right. Yeah, you get Derrick Henry in the backfield, you're aggressive, but at the same time, just like what we talked about, you allow big plays. Derrick Henry gets ahead of steam. You've got half the defense is already behind him because of the way that you attacked that particular play. And all of a sudden, he's out the back end for a 65-yard touchdown. We've seen Derrick Henry the ability to do that. I think that if Tyler Huntley is the quarterback, not Cooper Rush, we have seen Tyler Huntley offenses, they lean heavily on the run. And so I think you can make the argument that Derrick Henry just volumes his way to relevance. You talk about back end running back too. I mean, it's a light week, 6 teams on bye. I don't think it's very hard to get Derrick Henry up into our running back 1 range in your rankings. I just don't know that there's enough. I mean, if I could retroactively move Kamani Vidal up 5 spots in my rankings, then I think I could make the argument about Derrick Henry being a back-end RB2. But right now, just given where we're stacking up, concerns about some of these other offenses, Derrick Henry kind of still ends up there in that range for me.
Yeah, I've got him lumped in as a high-end RB1, or I'm sorry, a high-end RB2 with Rico Dowdle and Cam Scadaboo, and we'll talk about those games a little bit later. But I think you do make a good point that like Tyler Huntley, when he's out there, it is a more run-centric offense, and they can kind of run that read option a little bit. Tyler Huntley's got legs himself. He does really kind of look like a Wario Lamar Jackson out there. Like, he can still run. He doesn't have quite the big play upside, but they can run that read option. There's the dual threat coming out of the backfield, and I think that can benefit Derrick Henry a little bit. Want to talk about the Bears here though as well. I know, I don't want to say it too loudly, but I know a lot of people are quietly hoping that DJ Moore misses this game so the Luther Burden breakout can finally happen, but it does seem like he's going to be playing. So, I mean, when I'm looking at this wide receiver room, it to me feels very evident that it is like Rome Odunze and nobody else really matters in fantasy. I mean, like Rome Odunze is going to get he's got the big play upside. He's the preferred guy in the red zone. And then when you're looking at DJ Moore and Olamide Zaccheaus and Luther Burden and Colson Loveland and Cole Kmet and all these other guys, you're just praying that they can fall into the end zone because there just isn't enough volume going around to support everybody on a weekly basis.
Yeah, I think that I know the first read target data has not been kind to Rome Odunze the last couple of weeks, but we talked about it earlier this week on our usage show that you look at what Ben Johnson's building. He's building his offense. He's building layers into his offense. And through those first 4 games, I really like what our Cecil Lammy talks about with windows in the NFL season. And those first 4 games, I think it was just survival mode. And survival mode was Rome Odunze is our best player. Caleb, get the ball to Rome Odunze. We have to stack up some wins here because we know in New York how bad it's going if we don't stack up some wins here. But they were able to do that through that survival mode. Then they had that early bye, week 5 bye. They were able to really focus down on the run game, get that developed, get that rolling, and get in position. We saw a weather game against the Commanders. And then we saw a lead that they were able to build against the Saints. And so they were able to lean on the run game in those situations. If it's the Lamar Jackson game, I would be surprised if they're able to build a lead that they can lean on the run game in. And I think that you could get in a situation where we get some more room on Odunze volume going back on. If it's Tyler Huntley, then yeah, I could see a scenario where they get a lead on a Tyler Huntley or Cooper Rush-led Ravens team, and they're able to just lead on the run game. And I mean, that's football fundamentally, that these coaches, the NFL is just an ultra conservative league right now. And if coaches are able to lead on the run game, that's what they're going to want to do.
So I think this is one of the games that we probably have more to talk about than a lot of other ones. Like the other thing that I want to talk about here, DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai. We saw a split last week, and this wasn't just garbage time. I mean, like Kyle Monangai was coming in for full drives, and we've seen him steadily involved as a pass catcher as well, which is kind of shocking because he didn't do a lot of pass catching in Rutgers, but that's kind of how he carved out a role early in the season. We saw him out target DeAndre Swift 3-1 last week. So are we expecting more of a split backfield here? And I'm asking the question, but I'm just going to say I am expecting more of a split backfield here because Ben Johnson explicitly told us this in the preseason when talking about Kyle Monangai. He said this is a physical, hard runner that we want to rely on late in the year. And I think we're starting to see that develop now. You talk about how Ben Johnson is wanting to establish his brand of football. And I think all of that starts with the offensive line. And since the bye week, we've seen that interior offensive line that they paid up for a lot this offseason has started to mesh, has started to look really good. And now we're seeing the thunder lightning approach with Kyle Monangai kind of being that hammer, DeAndre Swift with the big play upside through these bigger lanes. And it's starting to feel very reminiscent of the offense that we saw coming out of Detroit. So now we're capping the ceiling a little bit for DeAndre Swift, but is Kyle Monangai a guy that you're looking at as potentially a flex play this week?
You have to. You've got 6 teams on bye, and I'm looking at your. Occasionally, I'll read your sheet, and I'm looking at it right now, and I see DeAndre Swift groin, did not practice Wednesday, limited practice Thursday,
Yep.
and while you have yes, Ben Johnson in the preseason talked about wanting to have a split backfield. You've also had the last couple of weeks DeAndre Swift dealing with injury, and looking at the long term of the season, getting through the season. You can't just keep stacking it on a guy that's already hurt, that's dealing with that. And we have to acknowledge, just like I said at the start of the show, injury affects performance, injury affects game planning, and injury creates opportunities. And we've got opportunity right now for Kyle Monangai to establish himself and really look like the Dollar General version of the David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs tandem.
Last question I have for you regarding this game, Jeff, and this could just be a simple yes or no question. Cole Kmet, not expected to play, has yet to practice this week. Probably not going to be out there. Colson Loveland, even before the Cole Kmet injury 2 weeks ago, we saw him lead Kmet in targets, routes, and receptions. Last week, we saw him looking pretty good in that role as well. Is he a guy you're looking at as a potential streamer in week 8?
Not just vibes, Dave. Sometimes we look at numbers. The Baltimore Ravens have allowed the 10th most points to the tight end position. I mean, Colson Loveland has the potential to play every single snap. And I think that you talk about the Luther Burden breakout. I think we're in for the Colson Loveland breakout this week. Great DFS play, by the way. $3,000 on DraftKings. He was my bargain of the week. We did the DFS show last night. I loved Colson Loveland without Cole Kmet in the lineup as a DFS option.
Yeah, I've got him at tight end 16, which doesn't mean that he's like a must start by any means, but definitely in that streaming discussion for people who are dealing with buys right now, looking at the waiver wire for a guy that they can put into their lineup. On to the next game, Buffalo Bills at Carolina Panthers. Not a ton of injuries in this one. We've got Dalton Kincaid limited in practice with an oblique injury. He's been dealing with that for a few weeks now. Josh Palmer has yet to practice this week with a knee and an ankle. Curtis Samuel limited with a rib injury. And then, of course, we've got Bryce Young, who is not going to play this week. I don't think they've officially announced it. Still kind of playing it a little bit coy here. They're saying that he's doubtful, but all signs are pointing to an Andy Dalton start. And I think that's the big question here, Jeff, is how does Andy Dalton starting impact this Carolina Panthers offense? Last week, we saw Xavier Legette extremely involved in the game plan, but I think a lot of that had to do with Sauce Gardner shadowing Tedero McMillan. So I've seen some buzz and some excitement for Xavier Legette in this matchup, but I think without a true shutdown corner here, this is just a better opportunity for Tedero McMillan than it would be for Xavier Legette.
Dave, the Christian Benford slander just continues across the football space. Christian Benford is a very, very good cornerback. And
he's not a Sauce Gardner level cornerback. He's not, a Pat Surtain level quarterback. He's not somebody who just deletes somebody from the game plan.
PFF grades last year, they would say something very different, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, I hear you. I think that when you look at holistically, when you look at Andy Dalton in here, Andy Dalton. It's the Ryan Fitzpatrick corollary quarterbacks of these veterans. You get some of these veterans that the first game or two, they come in, their hair's on fire, they are just chucking it, they just go with it, and then it doesn't hold up over 4 or 5 games. It looks really bad over 4 or 5 games, but those first 2 games are like, oh, let's go. What do we got here? And I think that I love Ryan Fitzpatrick, and he's done a great job of continuing his career in the media, and everything that he gives back is fantastic. But every time with Fitzpatrick, it was if there's the least amount of expectation coming in, that it was going to be a massive disappointment. But if there was no expectation at all, it was, oh, wheels up, let's go. And I think that
That's Andy
Andy Dalton
Dalton.
might be in that space right now where there's minimal expectation, and you just kind of are playing with house money. You've got a Panthers team that's 4-3, has to feel really good about being 4-3. Our good friend Joey Wright, I see him in the chat. Hi, Joey. But we've got my narrative streets going on here with, if you were really to look at sister organizations in the NFL, the Bills and the Panthers are basically a sister organization right now. Almost the entire brain trust, Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, all of these guys, Joe Brady, Billy Babbage, the defensive coordinator, they've all been in Carolina. They were in Carolina. Buffalo kind of plucked them all out of Carolina, built that staff up, and then it flipped around. Dan Morgan was with Brandon Beane in Buffalo and was on Brandon Beane's staff, came back to Carolina, great linebacker for the organization, now the general manager. So this is like three ties throughout. And I think that when you look at the Panthers, the big question is going to be Rico Dowdle, because we saw last week Chuba Hubbard come back, got the nominal start. They were able to split time. They played the Jets, and talked about the Jets being one of those matchups that you can kind of be a little bit liberal with your game planning and allow, maybe spread some touches around those types of things. If I'm Dave Canales, I'm looking at this and seeing the way that the Bills were gashed by Bijan Robinson 2 weeks ago. And I'm saying, if I want to win this game, it's all on Rico Dowdle. Let's go. And so I'm going to be really curious to see how they shake out with that run game, because if it is all on Rico Dowdle, I'm afraid as a Bills fan here in this matchup, if it's if they're splitting it and neither back's really getting into a rhythm, I think that really helps a Bills defense that's been depleted but is getting some pieces back this week.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because we opened up the show talking about Quentin Johnson and how some of these injuries linger. And that's something that you and I talked about weeks ago when we were looking at these bad games from Drake London after his week 1 injury as well. Do you wonder, I mean, like, it doesn't matter what you're looking at. If you're just looking at the raw box score, if you're looking at the advanced data, if you're grinding film, or if you're just simply watching the game, Rico Dowdle looked so much better than Chuba Hubbard last week. Like, there's no way that you can make that argument. But are you saying that maybe that is just like Chuba Hubbard coming back from injury, not up to 100%? Or do you think that we've seen enough now, going back to the midway point of last year when Chuba Hubbard took over the Panthers backfield, Rico Dowdle took over the Dallas Cowboys backfield? I mean, to me, Dowdle just seems like a much better running back. So you can make the argument that maybe Chuba was just limited coming back from this injury, but I still tend to believe that Dowdle is just the all-around better back.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. 100%. Dowdle's the better back. If he is got the lion's share of the work, that strikes some fear in me as have some vested interest in the other side of this game. I think Hubbard is a good NFL back, and I think he's a good scheme fit for Carolina. I don't think that Hubbard is a high-end potential NFL running back. I think he can get what is blocked. I think he is able to handle volume. I think that all those types of things, I think Rico Dowdle has potential to be a high-end running back just from what we've seen over the second half of last year and then the starts this year. I mean, we're at the point now where our Jeff Blaylock is fantastic, great friend of us. And Jeff Blaylock, he said something to the effect of, once is a fluke, once is a fluke, twice is a coincidence, and 3 times a trend. We're at like 10, 13 times Rico Dowdle now at this point.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you look back to the midway point of last year, and this guy's pacing for like 2,500 scrimmage yards in a 17-game season. He has been unbelievable. So, Jeff, last question I have for you here, and this is going to be about your Buffalo Bills. Over/under targets for James Cook this week, 0.5. What are you taking?
0.5 targets. I think that they are going to be over 0.5 targets because I don't know that Joe Brady
phased out of the pass game. Like, people don't seem to realize it. Like, he is not on the field for passing downs these last few weeks, and I don't know what's going on.
I think what is going on is early in the season they treated him like a feature back, and I think that
it was a fun few weeks.
I think that what happened, it reminds me a lot of 2 years ago. 2 years ago, I forget what the Bills' record was, but it was like 4-3 or something like that. And there was a lot of hand-wringing going on at that point in time. And then ultimately, Ken Dorsey lost his job. Joe Brady stepped in. I tend to think, it's like you said a couple weeks ago, going into that Patriots matchup, when I expressed some concern because I said, the Patriots get this one, Like we're
Mhm.
kind of inking the Bills in as AFC champs by Halloween right now at this point. And if the Patriots get this one, this thing is going to get really interesting really quick. Well, it's really interesting really quick. And I think that 2 years ago, when you looked at what happened with the team, I think there was a little bit of let's save ourselves for the playoffs. Like we think we're a playoff team. Let's make sure that we're healthy for the playoffs. And then I think what you saw last year was them basically acknowledging the in the previous year they didn't take things seriously enough at the beginning of the year, and it put them into a situation where and then really Miami rose up kind of out of nowhere, and it put them into a situation where they needed to be flawless over the last month of the season just to be able to win the division. I think that the last year they played with their hair on fire from the start. They blew teams out. They took care of business. I tend to think that this year they started out that way, maybe, especially
Mhm.
Baltimore forced them to start out that way, building that lead in the first game. And they were using James Cook as a feature back. They were, and then they kind of, I don't know if complacency or like thinking about pacing or whatnot got in, but I don't think that the hair on fire attitude was exactly there the last couple of weeks. And it's, I mean, this is a big spot for Buffalo because that what we talked about it 2 weeks ago, where the look on Josh Allen's face during that Monday night
Yes.
game was a look that I've not seen as Josh
In
Allen as the
years.
quarterback. And and me as a fan watching at home, it was one of those that the Falcons were dominating them, but at the same time, it was a one score game later in the game, and you're seeing Josh Allen, and you're like, I've seen this movie before. This is where Josh
Mhm.
Allen goes into kick butt mode and comes out here and they roll down, score a touchdown, then they force a turnover, they score another touchdown, and all of a sudden, the horse is in the barn and we're all good and ready to go home. And that never happened in that game. And so I think that there's definitely some concern about where the attitude is, where the mentality is, and not letting games get away, because we know the Patriots right now are not allowing any games to get away.
Yeah, and the offense for Buffalo right now, it just feels a little stale. It feels like they're thinking
Yes.
more than they are just playing.
Well,
I'm
when
sure
you're
you are aware of this.
short and you've got third and short and you're running an end around to Elijah
Right.
Moore, you're definitely overthinking some things.
Yeah, and I think you've probably seen the stat that, like, big plays were such a big part of this Buffalo offense, and over the last 2 years, there have been 26 touchdowns of 20 plus air yards for the Buffalo Bills. This year, there's been just one. Like, there just isn't that downfield threat anymore. Some of that could be due to the Dalton Kincaid injuries, the lack of emergence from Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir really just being pigeonholed into this short area of the field player, but still have faith that the Buffalo Bills can get it right. Anytime you got Josh Allen on a team, you can't count them out. So we'll hope that this can be that get right game that they desperately need. Let's move on to the next game here. New York Jets at Cincinnati Bengals. Garrett Wilson has not practiced this week. We probably won't see him out there unless there's a big change in today's practice report. Brees Hall has been limited with a knee injury. Terod Taylor limited with a knee injury as well. We'll talk about that in a minute. Mason Taylor was practiced in full on Wednesday, wasn't even on the injury report, and then popped up yesterday with a quadriceps injury and did not practice. So really don't like to see that happen midweek. All the Bengals players are healthy for the most part, but the all the fantasy relevant Bengals players are healthy, I should say. But I think the big question here, Jeff, is the quarterback situation, because it is getting messy here in New York, which shocker, as it often does in these big medias. But you got Woody Johnson coming out, just taking huge shots at Justin Fields, saying that, like, if we had a quarterback who could complete a forward pass, we'd be looking better. And then you've got Aaron Glenn the very next day kind of taken aback hearing these comments at the podium for the first time and saying, well, it's my choice to make. And he is still expressing some faith in Justin Fields. So now we've got Tyrod Taylor dealing with this injury, which adds another layer to the conversation here. What do you expect, Jeff? Do you think we see Justin Fields out there, or do you think that mid-game benching that we saw last week just marks the end of his time as a starter?
I I think Justin Fields is gonna play. I think he's gonna be the
So do
starter.
I.
Is
Yeah, I'm ranking it that way. Yeah.
Well, and part of me wonders if it wasn't moving, the injury might be a factor there, and you might have Aaron Glenn as a coach basically saying, "Hey, like I hear you, Woody Johnson, but Tyrod is hurt, and we
Right.
need to build up the confidence of the guy that we need to run out there because we don't have a third option right now." But
And you almost wonder,
to
and I just real quickly, I want to like note that Justin Field, he passed concussion protocol. And I'm not going to say that there's like anything nefarious happening on NFL sidelines, but like he got beamed in the head. And then back-to-back 3-and-outs, and then he, like, takes a sack to let the clock expire going into halftime. I'm not gonna sit here and say that Justin Fields is, like, the best processor in the world. He does make these mistakes often, but what you saw in those 3 drives following that very severe blow to the head that he took was just him looking completely lost out there, which full disclosure, we do see from time to time with Justin Fields, but I wonder if that was just kind of like a, "Hey, like, you really got your bell rung, like, let's just get out of this game and keep you healthy." I don't know if that was, like, a 100% benching. I think that that hit that he took probably had something to do with him not playing in the second half.
Well, we saw that concussion early in the season, and he missed a
Right.
game because of, or I don't think he missed any games. I think he
No, he didn't. He was
played. Yeah, he
he
didn't
was
miss.
pulled from the game very late, like, with
Yeah.
a few minutes left in the 4th quarter, but then he was back at practice and played the next week.
And I think I saw some comments from him basically like that he didn't have a lot of concussions previously, and he was kind of like it was like caught him off guard of like what it did to him a little bit,
Yeah.
and then yeah, like you said, you take a hit in that, and you're looking dazed out there, and you've already had one, and we know that. I mean, the two of us know that they can stack up very very quickly,
Yep.
and I think that that's definitely got to be a factor when you're
Mhm.
looking at it.
So, if like under the assumption, let's just say that Justin Fields is going to play in this matchup, we know that the Bills have been, or I'm sorry, the Bengals have been very susceptible to the run game. I know there's a lot of just like, Justin Fields isn't cut to be an NFL quarterback, his career's over, yada, yada, yada. We're talking about a weekly game here with fantasy football. I don't really care about any of that stuff. At the end of the day, like if you're getting Justin Fields starting in a matchup against the Cincinnati Bengals, that's a guy I'm looking at as a QB1 this week.
Well, I mean, especially, I don't know if I'm there on QB1. I think that there's still enough quarterbacks that I can avoid him in the quarterback one position. I've just been lower on Justin Fields the last couple of weeks than you have, and that's fine. I recognize that. I think that when I look at the Jets offense, I'm going to quote my girl, Katie Heron here, from Mean Girl fame. Katie said, the limit does not exist. And I think that what we're running into right now, and when I see models and I see like Jets post-mortem, like after the game, and it'll be analytics heavy analysis will kind of be like, I'm very caught off guard by this Jets offensive performance. And it's because I think, you build a good model and you build safeguards and you expect at least a minimum number that can be generated by these NFL offenses. And the Jets showed us 2 weeks ago. Right now, their current minimum number is -10 yards that can be generated by the passing game. So that's their current minimum number that they're able to generate. So I think it's, when you look at Breece Hall, when you look at Justin Fields, it's natural and it's probably good process to say there's a minimum number that an NFL offense should get up to in terms of passing and running production. So I don't want to bury below the minimum number. You can go below the minimum number. And like we've seen a Jets offense that has gone below the minimum number. It's been absolutely brutal. It's tough sledding. But couching everything this week with 6 teams on bye, you're still going to play Breece Hall. You're still in Superflex. You're still going to play Justin Fields. If you're desperate enough, and I'm desperate enough in some places, you might be playing Josh Reynolds. You might be playing Mason
Arian
Taylor if
Smith.
he's active. You might be playing Jeremy Rucker if Mason Taylor's not active. You might even be playing Arian Smith if you really have to.
Apocalypse is here. The other thing I want to talk about with the Bengals, I don't think we need to talk too much about Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. Like our savior, Joe Flacco, is here. We are starting Jamar Chase. We're starting T. Higgins. But I think the big question here is Chase Brown, because we have seen like he's not getting that 96% opportunity share that he had last year that made him so valuable. Samaje Perine is a little bit involved. But now what we saw last week was that the threat of an actual NFL passing attack is opening up run lanes, and Chase Brown saw his efficiency bounce back. He saw some targets as well. So what are we looking at with Chase Brown now? I think the dreams of him ascending into a top 3, top 5 running back, we can shelf those at this point. That probably isn't going to happen. But I still think that we're looking at a guy on a better offense now than what we saw with Jake Browning. The volume is still going to be there. The efficiency is bouncing back a little bit. And I'm kind of looking at Chase Brown as kind of like a middling to high end wide or RB2 going forward, rather than the like, do we even start this guy questions that we were having a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, a revenge game here for Joe Flacco going up against his former team, the New York Jets. So we've got narrative street walking down here, but
he's going to have a revenge game just about every other week if we keep playing this game.
Yes. Yes. Well, it's always fun. We didn't have a revenge game against the Packers when he went to the Bengals. It was a reverse game because he'd already played the Packers. But I, you look at the offense, what Joe Flacco has brought to the offense. The explosion was still clearly there last week for Chase Brown. We know that remains intact. And so as the pass game is able to get going, as they're able to attack vertically and stretch defenses around, then that opens up those run lanes that we've been waiting to see for Chase Brown. So I think it's potential, and the 96% target share or running back share, that doesn't, we were trending towards 50%, but after the production that we saw from Chase Brown last week, we haven't seen any production from Samaje Perine. So we've seen the coaching staff willing to go there with Chase Brown. And so it doesn't rule out willing to go there again if it's starting to roll and starting to feel better that it can be an element of their game. The Jets defense, they got shredded early in the season, and I think it was Quinnen Williams came out with a statement of basically like, that's not happening again. And I think that they've really sold out to stop the run. Just like they're like, everything else is broken here. You're just not going to run it on us, and we don't care what else happens. You're just not going to run it on us. And I think that they've kind of taken that the attitude towards the last couple of weeks, and it's been like the only thing that's been decent about this team.
Yeah, and what we saw last year, if you're looking at the raw snap data, was like a 60-40 split between Chase Brown and Samaje Perine. But Perine, so much what he does is coming in on passing downs and not even running routes, just pass blocking and nothing more. So I don't know about you, Jeff, but like I'm fine with that. If I'm rostering
Yeah.
Chase Brown, like I don't want Chase Brown, getting slammed by a middle linebacker 8 times a game trying to protect Joe Flacco. Like put Samaje Perine in for that and keep Chase Brown fresh for when he could actually touch the ball. And it seems like that's what we're seeing here. Any final notes on this game, or do you want to move on to the next one?
I mean, you're playing your Bengals, but it's
Yeah.
I do again just worry about some of these matchups, because if the Bengals get up 17-0 and the Jets look completely inept, do they just run the ball and get out of here? Do they look at this as an opportunity to say, the run game hasn't worked all year long, let's figure out if we can get some things figured out against an offense that doesn't scare us at all? But we know the Bengals defense has been susceptible. It's just, well, something's got to give here in terms of this Jets offense, because it cannot just continue to be this bad.
How quickly things change, man. Like just 2 weeks ago, we were talking about the Bengals being like a fake NFL team, like an XFL team that somehow found their way into the pro leagues. And now we're talking about them just putting this game away by halftime. I mean, it's things change quick. Well, let's move on to the 49ers at Houston Texans. And we've got a lot to talk about in this game. Lots of injuries. Juwan Jennings practicing in full, but he's still on the injury report with the ankle, ribs, shoulders, whole body is beat up right now. Ricky Pearsall, still not practicing. Haven't seen him in a long time now. He's out of practice with that knee injury. Hasn't played in about a month now. Mac Jones is practicing in full knee and oblique. Brock Purdy is limited in practice, still dealing with that turf toe injury that's been plaguing him since week 1. Christian McCaffrey got a rest day. No big concern there. Nico Collins has yet to practice after picking up a concussion late last week. Christian Kirk has yet to practice, dealing with a hamstring injury. And then we've got Dalton Schultz, who has really broken out over the last month or so, limited in practice with a back and shoulder injury, but we expect to see him out there. So, Jeff, let's start with the quarterback here for the San Francisco 49ers. Seems like we're trending towards another Mac Jones start, but we don't have official word yet. Do you have any read on which way this one goes? I mean, we've seen Brock Purdy is logging limited practices for the last few weeks, but turf toe, we know, is a notoriously fickle injury, and that if you just push it a little bit too hard, one day of extra practice could cause, a month of injury here. So I think they're just playing this as cautiously as possible. And Mac Jones has been great in relief, so I don't see why you don't just go with Mac Jones again.
I mean, we know Kyle Shanahan likes Mac Jones.
He does.
You don't know. It's at some point. I mean, Brock Purdy's got to go back to being the starter, right? I mean, you think at some point.
Is he getting JJ McCarthy right now? Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah. I'm not there yet, but it's I think that Kyle does absolutely like Mac Jones, and so it's just maybe something on the radar. I don't know if you saw the graphic or the tweet that made its rounds about is Ricky Pearsall injury prone, and it was like shot in chest and knee. Okay, is he injury prone?
I mean, he has dealt with something. He even had the hamstring injuries during training camp, and like I don't like the term injury prone, but Ricky Pearsall tends to be on the injury report more often than not.
Well, and I'd have to lean to Adam Hutchinson does a fantastic work, good friend of ours, and Adam is great. And so I don't want to. My medical opinion is nothing. My medical opinion is ask Adam. But I do think that you mentioned that hamstring. To me, it seems like we saw this string of in the NBA where there would be the calf injuries and that would lead to Achilles. It seemed
Hmm.
like with some of these high
Hmm.
profile players, you can't help but wonder if that hamstring was causing him to alter something, and then that leads to the knee. And some of these, yeah, injury prone might not be the right way to say it, to look at it, but one thing's wrong and it starts to alter how you're doing something else, and then that creates another thing that ends up being wrong.
Yep.
And I think that it's just something that I've seen happen.
Yeah, I mean, you learn the song in kindergarten. The thigh bone's connected to the knee bone's connected to the shin bone. Like it's all connected, and yeah, we see this often that these injuries do just kind of snowball a little bit. So, hoping Ricky Pearsall can get back out there because what we saw early in this year was great. I mean, on a per game basis, he's still fifth in the league in yards per game. Looked really good early on, but in this matchup now, I think the big question is we've seen like the big blow up games from Kendrick Bourne, but now that Juwan Jennings is healthy, practicing in full, we saw him kind of operating as the wide receiver one. So Kendrick Bourne here for a good time, not a long time. We saw those back-to-back huge weeks, but this week, if you had to start a San Francisco wide receiver, I'm imagining you're leaning towards Juwan Jennings over Kendrick Bourne, right?
I am. Yeah, I think that I don't know, the era of Kendrick Bourne. I hesitate to say it's over, but it's definitely not as exciting as it was 2 weeks ago. But they did have a tough matchup against the Falcons defense that is very good against the pass. And Christian McCaffrey, going into that game, they said after the game that Shanahan had said this is going to be a Christian McCaffrey game, and it was a Christian McCaffrey game. So I think it's in play, but we also know that the Texans defense can be pretty tough.
Is there
And
an easier
we
bet this
we
week
cannot
than
move we cannot move off the 49ers without. We've made it 46 minutes into this show. It is National Tight Ends Day on.
Jeff? That's just what I was about to ask. I was going to say, is there an easier bet to make than a George Kittle ATD this week?
It is National Tight Ends Day, and really, diving into the history of National Tight Ends Day, George Kittle is widely credited for the creation of National Tight Ends Day. It was actually Jimmy Garoppolo that created National Tight Ends Day. It was week 2 in 2018. Garrett Selleck caught a touchdown pass, and on the sidelines, I think they blew out the
Brent
Lions
Selleck?
in that game. Garrett Selleck, not Brent
Oh,
Selleck.
oh yeah, yeah. All right. Yeah, yeah.
So Garrett Selleck caught a touchdown pass, and then on the sidelines, Jimmy Garoppolo said, "What is it? National Tight Ends Day?" And George Kittle said, "Yes, it is National Tight Ends Day." And that was in 2018. In 2019, the league made it an official holiday, and it became celebrated on the fourth Sunday of every October. We have National Tight Ends Day. We have talked for 47 minutes and 21 seconds and not mentioned yet that it was National Tight Ends Day. It's George Kittle here. I mean, I'm concerned because George Kittle said last week he was not in game shape. He wanted to get back on the field, was not involved at all. So it can be trepidation about going back there until you see it. But at the same time, you better believe that they're going to try to let George Kittle celebrate on George Kittle's day.
As they always do. So, yeah, I mean, I'm still firing George Kittle up. Clearly not 100% last week, but it's just the tight end landscape is so bad right now that you look for me. It's like Jake Ferguson, Tyler Warren, Tucker Kraft. Those guys are in a tier of their own, and then behind that you've got George Kittle, Brock Bowers, obviously not playing this week, but like you're praying those guys can get healthy so they can enter that elite tier. And then behind those guys, it's just kind of everybody else, and it's like who's going to get into the touchdown or get into the end zone and get the touchdown that week. But I do want to talk about the tight ends, and I think that's a good segue to the guy that I really want to talk about here, which is Dalton Schultz. Coming into last week, he had 3 straight games with 6 targets, starting to get some pretty promising usage here. And then last week, we saw him explode 9 targets, 98 yards, got in the end zone as well. Is this the guy that you're looking at as a top 10, maybe a top 12 play going into week 8?
Struggle targets. It's all
Yep.
struggle targets, and we
Yep.
are the spiritual successor of Jonnu Smith here with Dalton Schultz just getting the struggle targets, coming on mid-season and ends up being a tight end 1 through the back half of the year because the Texans have nothing else working offensively. I mean, we might be there. I think this is a tough matchup against the 49ers defense. We saw shut down I mean, Bijan Robinson just got to 90 scrimmage yards, a key number for him, 12th game in a row with 90 scrimmage yards, but they really didn't get Drake London rolling last week against this 49ers defense. This is a good defense, even without Fred Warner in there. So that gives me a slight bit of trepidation, given that they've really struggled to protect CJ Stroud, but struggle targets. And so if you can't protect CJ Stroud, hitting his tight end to just get the ball out of his hands.
Also, want to talk about the wide receivers here in Houston. We've got Nico Collins and Christian Kirk. Neither are practicing. And to me, the two rookies that they drafted almost, I don't want to say carbon copies, but like such similar archetypes. Like you've got, moving from Nico Collins to Jaden Higgins and moving from Christian Kirk to Jalen Noel. It feels like you're getting two very, very similar players here. So curious if you had to pick, like, let's just, for the sake of conversation, assume that Nico Collins isn't going to play, assume that Christian Kirk isn't going to play. You're looking at the waiver wire for a guy that you need to pick up and start this week. Are you going to Jaden Higgins or are you going to Jalen Noel?
I'm not buying the Jaden Higgins. I got to see something before I'm going. I think Jaden Higgins doesn't seem all that different than Xavier Hutchinson right now to me. I'm not putting that in my lineup. And Jalen Noel, though, absolutely. I think Jalen Noel, it's
I'm firing Jalen Noel up in like 10-team leagues this week just because of how rough it is with bye weeks. Like he was a guy, one of my priority pickups. He kind of emerged as that go-to option down the stretch last week.
Yeah, I see our buddy Z in the chat, and he was gracious enough to join me and Matt Waldman last night on the Thursday live show, and we talked about Noel throughout that show, and I think it's Tank Dell recarnate here a little bit.
Right, 100%.
CJ Stroud really loved that Tank Dell target, and I think Noel can offer a lot of the same things. I think Z made a great point last night talking about how people kind of viewed Noel as just like a slot receiver, and he's way more than that. He's able to win outside, able to win downfield, and it really does feel like you made the Christian Kirk comp, and I don't know that I'm there on that because I just think Noel offers
stylistically a little bit, but I think a lot more. I mean, my actual comp for Jalen Noel when we were doing the whole rookie process and everything was Golden Tate. Because like he is a small guy, and I think people see Golden Tate and they think, a slot guy, a downfield burner, but he can do so much more. He is vicious after the catch. Somehow, despite his small stature, he is so good at pulling in contested targets as well. He's one of those guys that just plays so much bigger than his size. I actually, in my pre-draft rankings, I had Jalen Noel ahead of Jaden Higgins and was kind of surprised to see Jaden Higgins go earlier in the draft. But I think Noel is such a versatile and polished player. I am way in on Jalen Noel.
Yep. And I think when you look at long term, I mean, the Tank Dell comp, the Golden Tate comp, and I think CJ Stroud's comfortable with that type of receiver. And we talked previously about maybe some of the big receivers, it takes a little bit longer to get acclimated, to get up and rolling in the NFL, where some of the smaller receivers that are able to just create more natural separation, just stylistically, the way that they play. I think that's what you might be seeing here with the Texans wide receivers on Noel. It just opens up a little bit easier for Noel to be acclimated sooner rather than Jaden Higgins. Higgins is just, I don't know. I hesitate to say full redshirt season, but just haven't seen a lot put together there, because I think when you get into the red zone, we've seen Xavier Hutchinson start to establish himself a little bit as a red zone target. Dalton Schultz getting the struggle targets. I mean, you don't feel good about any of this, but at the same time, there is, unlike the Jets, there can be a limit where CJ Stroud can get up to at least a little bit, and I would expect him to be trailing in this game.
Last question I have for you, the backfield for the Houston Texans in this matchup, Woody Marks, Nick Chubb. I completely copped out. I just put them back-to-back in my rankings. I've got Woody Marks ahead because I could potentially see a game script that lends to more passing for the Texans, which would benefit Woody Marks. But I got to be honest, I don't feel good about either of these guys. They're both outside of my top 30 this week. If you had to pick one, who would you be choosing?
Marks, definitely, and especially in PPR scoring. But I think when you look at matchups, the 49ers matchups, somewhat similar to their division rival, the Seahawks matchup last week. Basically, if they're playing the Titans, or if they're playing the Raiders, or if they're playing the Jets, then I'm there on Nick Chubb. If they're playing literally anybody that can stop the run and score points, I'm going with Woody Marks.
All right, let's move on to the next one here. Cleveland Browns at New England Patriots. Jerry Jeudy didn't practice Wednesday, limited on Thursday. He's been dealing with a knee issue. David Njoku, coming back from that knee injury after missing last week, has been practicing in a limited fashion, so we hope that he'll be out there. For the Patriots, we've got Stephon Diggs limited with a chest injury, but no indications that he won't be ready to play. So, Jeff, I think the question here is like, is there a single pass catcher in Cleveland that we even care about at this point besides Harold Fannin and David Njoku? Since we've seen Dylan Gabriel take over, it has just been like 50% of the targets on a weekly basis are going to these tight ends. And the wide receivers are getting some looks here and there, but they haven't been catching them. I mean, it just seems like they're trying to revolve this offense around their two versatile tight ends. And I don't even know if anybody else matters. And I think the only reason they do matter is because they're tight ends. Like if these guys were getting folded into the wide receiver discussion, they'd be wide receiver 60, but because of the just struggles that we have right now in the tight end landscape, they both kind of fall into that streaming discussion.
Yeah, and I do the target report every single week. I look at all the targets for the teams, and it always surprises me when I get to the Browns because, Jerry Jeudy on my fantasy bench got like 4.5 points. And then I get to the target report and Jerry Jeudy got 10
9
targets.
targets.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, all right. The
And Isaiah
targets are
Bond, the
there.
same thing. Like, and I went back and I watched, and so many of these targets, I'm air quote right now for all the audio listeners, are just like throws that are clearly throwaways that are going, 5 feet over his head out of bounds, but it counts as a target on the stat sheet. But yeah, there just has been like no wide receiver involvement since we've seen Dylan Gabriel take over.
Yeah, and again, Matt Waldman has instilled so much wisdom into me, and so I quote him quite often. But he's always talked about the first however many games of a rookie's quarterback's career, defenses tend to play them, kind of conservative, kind of down the middle, don't go one way or the other. And I think that when you look at Dylan Gabriel, we've not seen him can be able to get the ball outside of the numbers. And I think that
Right.
that probably when you look at his scouting profile, what we're seeing right now is not surprising in terms of utilizing the middle of the field, having some mobility, but also struggling to push the ball downfield consistently, struggling to get the ball outside of the numbers. And at some point, you would think defenses are going to adjust and lock down on these tight ends and dare him to push it outside. We haven't seen him be able to do that yet. And so until that happens, yeah, you're still going to go to the tight ends because, again, like you said, the tight ends, there's this type of week that you're putting warm bodies into your lineup in reality in some of these, especially these deeper dynasty leagues that we play in where you're starting 10 players, you're anybody that might see 10 to 5 to even 3 targets at some point. I need them in my lineup this week. So you're there probably with David Njoku, with Harold Fannin. You don't feel good about much anything else.
So we know Tez Johnson was the clear wide receiver one last year for Oregon. Do you remember who the on a per game basis who had the most catches last year for Oregon?
On a per game basis, who had the most catches last year for Oregon? I'm going to say probably Terrence Ferguson.
It was, yeah, and I think it just makes so much sense. I also wonder if the height comes into play here. That Dylan Gabriel's smaller guy. He's like, oh, I could see these big, huge tight ends across the middle of the field, and I can't see Jerry Jeudy and Isaiah Bond and these other guys through the line. I wonder if there's something there. Like it's just easy for him to get the ball out of his hand quickly, get it to these big-bodied targets across the middle of the field. And we didn't see this too much earlier in the year when it was Joe Flacco starting there. Or I'm sorry. Yeah, Joe Flacco starting. He was spreading the ball around to the wide receivers. It has been just a cataclysmic shift in how this offense is operating since Gabriel took over. And I wonder if that does have something to do with his height, that it's just easier for him to find those big body tight ends.
Yeah, we need to find a team that we can put Jerry Jeudy and Jameis Winston on together. Maybe we'll call them like the New York Not Jets or something. But we need a situation where we can get Jameis playing with Jerry Jeudy again, and Jerry Jeudy can be a top 10 receiver because Jameis Winston's the only player that has gotten Jerry Jeudy to be a top 10 wide receiver. But Jameis Winston willing to hold the ball, can push the ball downfield. Mm-hmm. Jerry Jeudy likes to his TikTok routes, and Jerry Jeudy looks really cool running some routes sometimes, but opening up on time and those types of things can be a struggle, I think. And so, but I think that really when you look at the Browns, they know that they have a very strong defense. They want to keep the game conservative and run the ball, hit those tight ends, and protect the rookie quarterback, but also lean into having a strong defense.
Yeah, one of my favorite things the Browns do is when they run that play where Jerry Jeudy gets open 40 yards downfield, and by the time he throws his hand up to show that he's open, Dylan Gabriel is already on his back in the backfield. Yeah, the Browns really like that play. They run it a lot. We need to talk about the Patriots a little
Yeah.
bit, but this is also like, who you're starting here. Drake May, a, elite QB1 at this point. No question about that. Stephon Diggs, we know on a per route basis, has been absolutely elite. You're starting him, hoping the upside can hit, hoping that he can get into the end zone. I think when you're looking at Kayshon Boutte, I mean, like all of these receivers, I don't want to say this because people are going to, take it the wrong way, but it's so reminiscent of the Tom Brady era, right? Where he is just spreading the ball around to everybody and you don't know how to start on a weekly basis. They don't have a Randy Moss on this depth chart right now. So it's like everybody's getting theirs. We're going to see Demario Douglas have his blow up games. We're going to see Kayshon Boutte have 2 touchdown games. We're going to see Stephon Diggs have his random 150-yard games. It's so hard to predict. I think Diggs is the guy that you're starting, without question. Kayshon Boutte is the guy that you're kind of looking at as a streamer in deeper leagues. And then even if you're desperate enough, you can look at Demario Douglas or Hunter Henry as guys that you can put in as your flexes.
I'm comfortable with Diggs. I think
Yeah.
I think there's a belief like waiting for Diggs to be at 90% snap player, and I just don't think Diggs is a 90% snap player. He wasn't in Buffalo. He was a 75% snap player. They take him off during run plays. It's not going to happen.
So I want to say it's not just like the snaps, though. It's also the routes. Like I'm okay with a wide receiver who comes off the field for running plays because they're not running routes there. But even the routes run right now, he's 57th in routes run. He's 69th in route participation. So it's also that there are a lot of like obvious passing plays where Diggs isn't on the field as well. And I think that's more concerning than the snap count is just the route participation.
I see 7 targets 4 weeks ago, 12 targets against Buffalo, 3 targets, and then 7 targets again last week. And that's what I see. And I think
on a per route basis, Puka Nacua and JSN are the only guys pulling more targets than him. I mean, like when he's on the field, he is drawing targets. So I just like imagine like think like that 69% route participation. If we can get that up to 80%, then all of a sudden we're looking at like a 10 point or 10 target per game floor. I think that's where I really, really get excited is if we can get to that point. We got to remember this game that he's playing on Sunday in week 8 is the first time that he's played a game over a year removed from his ACL. And that's what they say is like 365 days is what we want to see. This will be the first game that he'll be a full year removed from the injury.
Yeah. And I always say I'm hesitant to throw too much on one game, but 6 for 101 4 weeks ago, 10 for 146 in that blow up spot, 7 for 69 last week, and then there was the 3 for 28, and that really, I mean, he had a couple of offensive pass interference penalties that could have been more like 5 for 70, and if we're sitting there with a 5 for 70 in that spot, then all of a sudden we're saying, well, he's been above 69 yards each of the last 4 games, been above 6 receptions in 3 of those, and I think that we're not having some of the concerns that you're expressing about Stephon Diggs. I think Stephon Diggs, I'm kind of there in terms of he's going to be in my lineup more weeks than he's not.
Oh,
I hear you on the route participation data, but I do think he has stepped forward to establish himself as their primary go-to receiver. It's he just had that one game 2 weeks ago. And again, some of that was due to some interesting officiating that allowed for some penalties that was called against this offense. I'm not entirely too concerned about the participation data. I think that Diggs is the primary concern would be.
I don't want to say I'm concerned. I just want to put a quick pin in this. He's my wide receiver 17 this week. Like I don't have any concerns, but I think the difference in what he's doing right now and what he could be doing at the end of the year is the difference between being a wide receiver 2 and being an elite wide receiver 1. Like I feel like, we saw this with Josh Allen where he was giving us top 3, top 5 numbers. And I think that he could get there, but he would just need to see a larger snap share and run a few more routes. And I still think that's in the range of outcomes. If he can get there at the end of the season, start running more often, then we could see him. And I don't think I'm being hyperbolic when I say that he can ascend to being a top 5, a top 10 wide receiver on a weekly basis.
I don't think it's in this offense, to be honest. I don't think he gets there in this offense just because I think they're intentional with their wide receiver usage. And I think you're going to have the Boutte spike weeks. You're going to have Demario Douglas seems to be, I don't know if there was some confidence going on there with Douglas or what, but it seems to be that he's rebounded a little bit the last couple of weeks. Mac Hollins, we know Mac Hollins is out there to block people and not catch footballs. So he's going to be out there. We know we've got Hunter Henry. It's just a lot of there's not such thing as too many mouths to feed, but I think there is a such thing as we're just not going to see too many of these instances where he's going up against the Bills on a primetime spot and he's just extra motivated for the game to go off in that spot.
And then last question I have here, Travion Henderson, I'm still ranking him inside the top 30 this week, which is way ahead of consensus. I mean, people have just written Travion Henderson off for dead at this point. Like the narrative going into last week was, there's only 2 running backs on the roster. It's a clear 50-50 split. Like Travion Henderson's season is here. And then we get this weird game where Terrell Jennings comes in and gets some touches. Travion Henderson isn't on the field that much. And I got to give it to Ramondre Stevenson. Like he was running really well. And I think that's why they just continued to lean on him. But I think people might have overreacted a little bit when I see like Travion Henderson getting dropped as waivers are going through. Yeah, shocker, right? But like it's one game and people are acting like Travion Henderson is just dead now. And I'm not there. Like I think that this was just kind of a weird, fluky game, and I'm still looking at Travion as a top 30 guy, and like it's just crazy to me that he's getting dropped in leagues.
Well, I mean, the comments that I saw this week kind of basically said we thought we were going to blow the Titans out and our run game's not been good. So we wanted to give Ramondre Stevenson a chance to establish the run game, more or less, was kind of the approach that they went into last week. And it's, yeah, I mean, people are going to have the reaction. I think it's faulty logic because I think the logic is built upon the belief that Ramondre Stevenson is horrible. And if he's horrible, then how is Travion Henderson not outplaying this horrible running back? And I don't think the Patriots view Ramondre Stevenson as horrible. And I think that 3 or 4 years ago in fantasy football, we didn't view Ramondre Stevenson as horrible. He was the new exciting guy. And it's,
Right.
it's him, it's Rachaad White. It's like these guys that we were all in 3 or 4 years ago, and they were good, but they didn't get to being running back 2. And so like unplug them now because they didn't end up elite. And I think that it's, Ramondre Stevenson is not a horrible running back. Ramondre Stevenson probably knows the offense better than anybody else on the field, and he's still playing with an offense that's trying to establish itself and get Drake May up and going. And so just the overreaction theater. I mean, I think Travion Henderson is a great dynasty buy if you're going to go out there. And I think that Travion Henderson, should Ramondre Stevenson miss time in the second half of the season, Travion Henderson can still be a difference-making running back in your fantasy football league. I hear the same things that you hear on dropping him and all that, but look at your waiver wire. And if there's not a high-end backup running back sitting there, and it's even like Kyle Monangai, I mean, like maybe you can make the argument I'll drop Travion Henderson for Kyle Monangai if he's just sitting out in waivers, but most of the leagues that is consuming, we're niche enough, Dave, that most of the leagues that are consuming us probably don't have plug and play. Rico Dowdle's not sitting on the waiver wire in these leagues that are listening to us.
Yeah, and that's it. Like I just like I guess maybe, yeah, if there's like a Kyle Monangai available, something like that. But yeah, it's just all context. Like I'm not dropping him for a Jalen Noel. Like as much as I love Jalen Noel, like it's just I think we've kind of jumped the shark talking about the Travion Henderson panic. But anyway, let's go on. This is the last game in the afternoon slate. We got the Giants at the Philadelphia Eagles. And Jeff, I don't know about you, this is one of the games that I'm probably most excited for, especially after we saw this primetime matchup a couple of weeks ago that really kind of surprised everybody. Let's talk about the injuries first. Jackson Dart, ankle, he's practicing in full, so no concern there. Darius Slayton back at practice with a hamstring injury. He's limited, so we'll hope to see him out there this week. Daniel Bellinger also limited with a neck injury. AJ Brown hasn't practiced all week dealing with a pectoral injury, so definitely keeping a close eye on that. And then Dallas Goedert, he was limited early in the week, but practiced in full yesterday, so no concerns there. Jeff, this is that game that we saw a couple of weeks ago on Thursday Night Football shocked a lot of people in New York. We saw Cam Skadaboo rush for 3 touchdowns. We saw this big Jackson Dart blow up spot. I've got to think going into the link now, Philadelphia is probably a little bit more motivated to win this game. I don't know. Like on one hand, I want to just say that this is going to be a get right game for Philadelphia and that the Giants don't stand a chance. But I also kind of thought that last week. And I know, yeah, the Giants lost last week, but they also, up until the fourth quarter, were just beating down Denver in Denver last week. So I don't know. I struggle so hard to get a read on this game. I could see the Giants blowing the Eagles out. I could see the Eagles blowing the Giants out. I could see a close game coming down to the final minutes. I could see a shootout. I could see a 3-6 matchup. I mean, there are so many different ways I could see this game going. That's why I'm excited to watch it, but it is made for a very frustrating exercise trying to rank these players.
we'll get to the Broncos, but I called Bo Nix the spiritual successor to Russell Wilson earlier this week, where Russell Wilson would always have 4 fantasy points through 3 quarters, and you were saying, "What did I do? Why did I play this guy?" And then he would have 27 points at the end of the game. Feel like we
The
might be
old
there.
hot dog quarterback.
Yeah, I don't know where we are there, but I think that when you look back 2 weeks ago, I mean, we're human and NFL players are human, and you probably run into some scenarios where you say we're the big bad Eagles and we're going to roll here on the short week, and we know what we got here, and then momentum starts to move in one direction, and then all of a sudden you can't get off the bus. I think that it's really interesting on the Eagle side of seeing what we saw last week, because they had that mini bye, and really we saw them flash back to 2022-2023 offense with Jalen Hurts in the passing game. And from the start, just we're going to attack downfield. And I think that prior to that, they were still trying to be the lean on Saquon Barkley. Let's not ask Jalen Hurts to do too much. You know what we got here. And then that Giants game kind of shook them and woke them up a little bit. I'm sure that they were probably going into that Thursday night game saying, let's
just get out of here with a W.
We're going into
it's gonna be easy.
New York. Saquon's returning home. Amazon is premiering the Saquon movie after this game. Saquon's gonna run for 250 yards and 3 touchdowns. We got this in the bag. And then it didn't happen, and they ended up losing. And I think you would think this spot here is you can't let this game get away, because you're in position here with 5-2. The Giants are 2-5. You beat them down here in this spot. You stamp them out in the division. The Commanders look like they're struggling in the division with the injury concerns about Jane Daniels, and you're really back to establishing yourself as Dallas is starting to figure some things out, but you're really back to establishing yourself back on top of your division. You lose this game and you're 5-3. You're in a car crash with Dallas. The Giants are feeling like they're alive. They're only 2 games back and they've got 2 games up on you in the tiebreaker. It's really, this is transition. Like, it's going to go one way or the other. The inflection point is in this game.
So I have posed this question to quite a few people over the week, and I'm going to ask you the same, Jeff. Rest of season, who do you prefer, Saquon Barkley or Javonte Williams?
I prefer Javonte Williams rest of season. I know that sounds crazy, but the offensive environment in Dallas, it's just, I don't know. I don't know if it's the offensive line. I don't know if it's just the mounting injuries. I don't know if defensive adjusted to this, and the Eagles need to attack vertically to open it back up for Saquon. I think that's could be part of it, that they attack vertically, defenses start to play them differently, and you start to get some running lanes back in. But we've just seen so far with the production, I don't think anything feels fake about what Javonte Williams is doing.
And I just wrote in my rest of season rankings article this week, kind of my love letter to Javonte Williams, if you will, just talking about how there's been this trend in the NFL. Like, we see it with Javonte Williams this year. And it's so, I feel foolish for not anticipating this, because we saw this last year with Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry and J.K. Dobbins, and these guys, that suffered injuries with their teams, stayed with those teams and had some dwindling efficiency, and then found a new environment and a change of address, and all of a sudden just like rebounded to pre-injury efficiency. That's exactly what we're seeing from Javonte Williams right now. All of the metrics that I care about, breakaway run rate, missed tackles forced, and yards after contact per attempt, Javonte Williams is hitting exactly what he was doing before his injury after really struggling over the last few years in Denver. And I don't know, like, if it's a psychological aspect, sitting in these training rooms and practice field where they have all of these memories of dealing with tough injuries and whatnot, and just like a change of scenery really helps them return to their former self. But that's what we're seeing with Javonte Williams right now. All of that to be said, very excited to see where Kenneth Walker and Breece Hall and Travis Etienne and some of these other guys land going into 2026. But Jeff, anything else you want to talk about, major takeaways with this game? I mean, I think we kind of know these are pretty condensed offenses for the most part. We know A.J. Brown, if he's active, which he might not be, we know you're starting him. You're starting Devonta Smith. You're starting Dallas Goedert. You're starting Saquon Barkley. For the Giants, you're starting Cam Scatterbo. You're starting Jackson Dart. If you're desperate, you're throwing Darius Slayton in there. I think the one interesting player, maybe Tyrone Tracy. We saw him in his first game back, didn't do much of anything at all. We saw him a little bit more involved last week. We saw that explosive touchdown. And this game, if it does go the way that we kind of expect, where the Eagles can run away with this one a little bit, that opens up a potential game script where Tyrone Tracy could end up gobbling up some targets in the second half. I'm not saying that you need to get him in your lineup, but Tyrone Tracy just barely sneaks into my top 36 this week.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conversation on who's actually better in the passing game, because I know Tyrone
Right.
Tracy, converted wide receiver. I tend to think Cam
Cam
Scatterbo is
Scadaboo is
actually
very good.
better in the passing
Yeah.
game than Tyrone Tracy is. But it does, we are trending back towards Tyrone Tracy being involved in the offense. And you have to remember too that Tyrone Tracy won the job in camp. He was a starting running back early in the season. He was playing in the Russell Wilson offense. He had some concerns that he voiced about the offense, then got hurt right after that, and it allowed for the Cam Scatterbo explosion here. That said, I mean, it's obvious they were talking about, the players talking about after that win over Philadelphia, just how you can see how much energy Jackson Dart and Cam Scatterbo give the entire organization, and everything feeds off of them. And so it's how do you unplug that? That's been such a key part of this. But at the same time, how do you, if you think Tyrone Tracy's pretty good, pretty valuable, and we were all in on Tyrone Tracy the second half of last year, and it's out with the old, in with the new at running back, how we see so often, so quickly. But I think that Tracy, the ability for explosive plays, like you mentioned, is definitely there, and you start to work them in tandem is eventually where you probably want to get to. And that's where Brian Dable was with his offense, with back to Buffalo with Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, utilizing those backs in tandem. And I think Brian Dable's got some of the roots of the Patriots dual running back system in his blood as well. And so I think you're exactly right. It opens up for it. It's how do you play it? It's going to be really interesting, because I think you're still going Scatterbo. You're not there on starting Tracy yet, but you do need to monitor this. And does it lower Cam Scatterbo's ceiling potentially? But we're seeing from scrimmage yards, Cam Scatterbo has 90 scrimmage yards in each of the last 5 games, and the last rookie to do that was Najee Harris in 2021. Wow. So that tells you how Cam Scatterbo has been trending.
Let's move on to the late afternoon slate here. In the first game we got that we're going to talk about in this one, Tampa Bay Buccaneers playing against the New Orleans Saints in an NFC showdown. Ibuka did not practice Wednesday, but he was back on the practice field Thursday. He was able to play through the injury last week, so we expect to see him out there again this week. Chris Godwin still not practicing with his fibula injury. Mike Evans out for what we expect to be the remainder of the regular season with a broken collarbone. Bucky Irving dealing with this foot injury, still not practicing. Baker Mayfield was limited Wednesday with a knee issue, but he was back to a full participant this week. I don't know if there's a team right now that needs a bye week more than the Buccaneers. I mean, they are just so banged up on both sides of the ball. Chris Olave didn't practice Wednesday with an ankle injury, but he was a full participant yesterday. And then Alvin Kamara, dealing with an ankle injury, has been limited throughout the week. Kendre Miller out for the year with a torn ACL. And then Juwan Johnson, dealing with a neck injury, was limited in practice. Jeff, I don't know what the first thing to talk about here is. Probably got to be the pass catchers for Tampa Bay, I'd imagine. Schematically, I'll tell you how I expect this to work out, and you can tell me what you think. I think Ibuka kind of plays that X role, fits right into what Mike Evans was doing. I think Sterling Shepard, we've seen at this point in his career, really can't do anything outside of the slot, so I expect to see him there. And then Tez Johnson gets pushed out to the flanker role, which is where we saw Jalen McMillan really stepping up in a big way down the stretch last year. So, I'm looking at this as Ibuka is your must start. You're getting him in your lineup, even if he's dealing with an injury. Sterling Shepard is like hey, I really need 6 to 8 points out of a flex spot. But Tez Johnson, I think, is the kind of exciting player that can score these big touchdowns and kind of the Jalen McMillan of it all that we saw last year. And then even Cade Otton is a guy that we've seen step up in big ways throughout injuries. So I think there's a lot of intriguing guys right now that you can just pick up off of the waiver wire. Maybe not Tez Johnson at this point, but Sterling Shepard probably still available. Cade Otton probably still available. There's some guys that you can just pick up and put in your flex spots this week to get through some of these buys.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely steam that's bubbling on Tez Johnson because he's the mystery box. He's the new exciting thing. But it's another thing that we discussed last night is kind of the way that these young receivers, it's basically like you got to find your way onto the field. And then when you find your way onto the field, things start to accidentally happen. And then when you're able to make things accidentally happen, then things start to happen on purpose. And I don't know that we're quite there yet on things happening on purpose. With Tez Johnson, we're probably still sitting in the accidental zone. But when you're out there with Baker Mayfield, the ability to catch touchdowns in play every single week. And so that's kind of where you're just any of these passing targets. I think outside of obviously Ibuka, but probably out Cade Otton, I feel like I'd be comfortable enough with Cade Otton to be there. I think when you're looking at Shepard and Tez Johnson, you're really hoping, right, they just accidentally find the end zone more or less at this point to start them in the week. But we're in a week where you might be considering that.
Yeah, and I got Cade Otton as my tight end 9 this week. So I mean, again, just kind of in that shuffle with all the other streamers, but I like him a lot more than a lot of the other streamers. Let's talk about the New Orleans Saints, though. We got Alvin. Yeah,
Just saying it from the Buccaneers side. God, I mean, they lost last week, so maybe, but man, this feels like a letdown spot. Like this feels like just, you're on the road, you've got the bye next week. You're kind of thinking, we'll handle the Saints, and then the Saints come out and bite you.
yeah. That being said, Baker, I mean, like losing 2 straight. I don't know. I mean, it could potentially happen, but the Saints have just been so bad this year that it is a potential letdown spot. I hear what you're saying, but I think that the Buccaneers are a little bit more disciplined than that. But again, like we've seen crazier things happen, like we just talked about with the Eagles going into New York a couple weeks ago and blowing that one. Alvin Kamara, I think, is the interesting guy to talk about here. We saw him losing his long-time workhorse role in this offense to Kendre Miller, with Kendre Miller now out for the season. How do you expect this backfield to shake out? Do we see Alvin Kamara just go back to like the 90% opportunity share? Or do you think that Devin Neal is going to just kind of get plopped into that Kendre Miller role and take 20, 30, 35% of the touches?
Dorsey, offensive weapon, Taysom Hill. I think that we'll see some Taysom Hill in the short yardage. I think that Devin
You don't
Neal.
have to sell me on Taysom Hill, my tight end 12 on the week.
Yeah, Devin, we just haven't seen it, I think, with Devin Neal. And so that's where it's always tough with these young backs when you just haven't seen it there yet. I know that there was a lot of rookie hype on Devin Neal, and obviously lost his job to Kendre Miller, but we haven't seen it yet. I think short yardage is Taysom Hill. Probably getting him involved in the run game might be the answer to some of that. Devin Neal, I do expect to play. I do expect to get some touches. I think the bigger concern on Alvin Kamara is even with Kendre Miller in there. We saw a couple games where we saw the passing work. We saw a couple of other games where we didn't see any passing work.
Rattler just doesn't shut down. Rattler will just throw it deep downfield to a guy in double coverage when Alvin Kamara is sitting there wide open in the flat with his arms out, like begging for the ball. That's just what Spencer Rattler does. So as much as I'm not excited about a potential change to Tyler Shuck, because I don't think that he is very good, I am excited about Tyler Shuck just being a little bit more mature of a quarterback and like knowing how to get through his progressions. And I hope that if Tyler Shuck does take over at some point, that Alvin Kamara can regain his PPR floor. But let's move on to this next game here, Jeff. I don't think there's anything else to talk about in the Bucs Saints, right?
Well, just they're fun bad. The Saints are fun bad, and don't even don't put it out in the world of like killing this fun bad team that's just pushing the ball downfield and making other offenses continue to have to score for potential check down hero Tyler Shuck. Gives me shudders.
I know. I'm with you. But let's move on. Dallas Cowboys at Denver Broncos. And as we always do, we start off these conversations talking about these matchups with the fantasy relevant injuries. Jeff, this is like, as rare as a scoregami these days. Going into week 8, it's very rare that we talk about a matchup where all of the fantasy relevant players are happy. And that's exactly what we have right now with the Cowboys and the Broncos. So let's just talk about this game as a whole. I think the thing that I'm going to be paying most attention to here is who Pat Surtain is going to be covering. I expect him to stick on George Pickens, who is a pure outside receiver. We see CeeDee Lamb bounces a lot between outside and in the slot, and Pat Surtain never really moves to cover a slot wide receiver. So this is a game where I'm tempering expectations for George Pickens. I've got him as kind of a boom bust middling wide receiver too, and CeeDee Lamb right where he belongs as a top 3 wide receiver this week.
Yeah, I think just the larger point is I think there might be a temptation to see a Denver defense and to get cute on some of these Cowboys players, and don't get cute. I mean, this is the highest Vegas total on the slate. You should be playing every option that you have in this game.
I'm starting Marvin Mims in a handful of leagues, just because, this seems like it should be a blow-up spot for both teams.
Yeah, I mean, you expressed the concern on George Pickens, but the concern is
still starting him. Yeah.
Right, and you still got him as a like top 15 play. So basically,
Right.
I do expect that as we get to Sunday Live with our friend Joey Wright, I think that we'll probably get some interesting George Pickens start sit questions because of the concern about Denver. In almost every single situation, you're still putting George Pickens into your lineup. You're playing all your Cowboys pieces. You've got the juicy revenge narrative with Javonte Williams going up against Denver. You've got, I understand concern about the Denver defense, but the Denver defense also gave up 30 points to Jackson Dart last week and got hit by some big plays downfield. So I think that that's just any time with this Dallas defense, you've got to play every element in it, especially when you've got a team that can push the ball on the other side. The spiritual successor to Russell Wilson. Are we going to be sitting there saying, this is just a juicy matchup for Bo Nix? What did we do through 3 quarters, and then he still ends up with 30 points?
Yeah, I mean, in football, guys scoring the 6-point passing touchdowns, he ended up with 47 points. I know because I faced against him in a matchup with Bob Harris last week. But yeah, I mean, Marvin Mims, this is a guy that we've seen. His route participation has grown a ton over the last few weeks. I don't know where you've got him ranked, Jeff. I'm totally taking the cheese here. I've got Marvin Mims as my wide receiver 35 on the week.
Where do you
Sneaking
have Troy
inside my
Franklin then?
I've got Troy Franklin right there as well, wide receiver 38. So a couple spots behind Marvin Mims. And I think the reason for that is that we have seen this Dallas Cowboys defense is very susceptible to the big plays. And I expect Marvin Mims to be more that big play threat. He's a guy who lines up as the Z and runs a lot of those 9 routes. I think Troy Franklin has a higher target total, but Marvin Mims, his opportunity of scoring a 60, 70-yard touchdown, he's got that. And I don't think Troy Franklin does. So looking at both of these guys as wide receiver 3s, I just think the ceiling for Marvin Mims is even higher.
Where do you think targets this year?
Mhm.
Let's do all 3 Denver wide receivers, and I'll give you a range within 3 numbers. Where do you think Cortland Sutton, plus or minus of 3 targets, where do you think he stands right now?
I want to say like 46 targets.
Close. You have 50 targets. Where do you
All
think
right.
Troy Franklin stands right now?
47.
Good. 46. And where do you think
Okay.
Marvin Mims stands right now?
34.
You got it. I'm 31. So, you're within the range of 3. So, yeah, I mean, we're seeing
Pat
Troy
myself on the
Franklin
back.
be good job, Dave. We're seeing him be targeted almost at a similar level of Cortland Sutton, both 10 targets last week. Marvin Mims has lagged behind. I agree with you. Big play potential. Marvin Mims is definitely a player that I would put in my lineups. I'm just a little bit more bullish on Troy Franklin. I think as we stand right now, that being said, I don't know. It's one that you buy into Troy Franklin, and the next week there's 4 targets, and then you're like,
Right.
maybe it's not really happening here. And the next week it's 10 targets. It's just kind of that type of situation.
So I think what I get excited about in regards to Marvin Mims is that he set a season high in routes run last week. And I mean, that's been the problem. Like early in the season, 27 routes, 13 routes, 20 routes, 23 routes, 19 routes, 15 routes. And then last week explodes for 33 routes. And a lot of that was, them playing from behind and having to throw the ball a little bit more than they normally would. But the route participation was a season high as well. So I think that, we saw he was kind of a rotational piece with some other wide receivers there. And last week, he was playing more than 50% of the snaps, running routes on more than 50% of the plays, and just seeing how susceptible this Dallas defense has been to big plays. That's what gets me a little bit excited about him. But yeah, I think we've talked about this game enough. This is just like a fire all cannons. If you've got Cowboys players, if you got Broncos players, like I could even see RJ Harvey coming to life in this game. This this should be a fun one. Let's move on to the second to last game in the late afternoon slate. Tennessee Titans at Indianapolis Colts. And this feels like we know the way that this game is going to go, but let's talk about it anyway. Tony Pollard got a rest day on Wednesday, which he often does since joining the Titans. Hardly practiced at all last year and was still suiting up every single week. Calvin Ridley not practicing with a hamstring injury. Josh Downs back to practice with a concussion after missing last week. So, Jeff, I mean, we can talk about the running backs here. There's a lot of desperate managers out there during bye weeks that are starting Tony Pollard and starting Tajay Spears, but my goodness, you don't feel good about either of those, right?
I don't feel good about any offensive pieces on the Tennessee Titans,
I know
but you're in
nobody.
positions where you're going to have to start some of them. It's, but you lump them in with the Jets at some level. But we saw Cam Ward had 255 yards last week and
Yeah.
spread the ball around, really. I mean, I think there's a little bit of steam out there for Chimere DK as we saw the big play I don't know, Tyler Lockett. He asked for his release from prison and was granted. So he's able to be out there and find a new job. So you've
Is
got
this
that
one as
going on.
simple as like don't start your Titans and start all your Colts? Is it
Yes.
that simple?
Yes. Alec Pierce included. Don't start your Titans and start all your Colts, basically.
I think that's pretty much it. Yeah. And I mean, I think the fear with this one, again, is we've talked about so much this year, like it really feels like it's happened more this year than it ever has before. Is that the fear here is that, by the time they get into the midway point of the third quarter, it's going to be Tyler Goodson and Amir Abdullah and, who else is out there. But we have seen this Colts offense is so explosive this year. I mean, they're doing all the right things, running motion at the highest rate. Daniel Jones is third in the league in EPA per drop back. Like this offense is just firing on every single cylinder right now. So you're starting Michael Pittman, you're starting Alec Pierce, you're starting Josh Downs, you're starting Jonathan Taylor, you're starting Daniel Jones. I think it's just that simple.
Yeah, and I know early in the season you were making some comparisons between the Colts and Saints from last year, but Daniel Jones is the Saints last year. It was the big plays downfield, the unsustainable with those big plays. Daniel Jones is just being asked to make the layups. Is basically all of it. Is just make the layups, and Daniel Jones is able to make the layups, and so that's what you're getting on the Colts side. Jonathan Taylor has 5 career 3 rushing touchdown games. 3 of those have come in the last 5 games. So that kind of tells you where Jonathan Taylor's running right now.
Jonathan Taylor, he's looked unbelievable this year, like nothing that you don't know already, but just looks like the best running back in football. Christian McCaffrey, better fantasy asset because he gets all of those passes. But yeah, Jonathan Taylor, love to see what he has been doing this year. All right, Sunday Night Football, Packers at Steelers. I am so mad at the NFL schedule makers, Jeff. How do you put the Packers and Steelers together and not put this game in Lambeau? Like it's just such a missed opportunity for the Aaron Rodgers,
That's
homecoming.
not how the schedule works. Though. I think it's very scientific in how they have that decision.
Yeah, I feel like they could have fudged something to make this happen. It just I want to see Aaron Rodgers play in Lambeau is all I'm getting at. Let's talk about the injuries here. Josh Jacobs still dealing with this calf injury. He played through it last week. Wasn't his normal workhorse self though. We did see a little bit of Emmanuel Wilson, so we'll discuss that. Christian Watson still back at practice in a limited fashion as he's trying to come back from last year's ACL tear. Dontavian Wicks has yet to practice with a knee injury for the Pittsburgh Steelers. We've got DK Metcalf getting a rest day on Thursday, but he'll be out there, no concerns at all. And then Calvin Austin coming back from that shoulder injury, he is practicing in full. So, Jeff, I think the first thing I want to talk about here is Josh Jacobs. We know Josh Jacobs, one of the best running backs in football. We've also seen Emmanuel Wilson has played really well this year in these little bits of relief. Last week, we saw Josh Jacobs wasn't 100%. They used Emmanuel Wilson a little bit more than they normally do. Do you think that happens again this week, or do you think that they are just going to, if they can lean on Josh Jacobs, they're just going to do that like they have?
I think they're probably going to be conservative with Josh Jacobs, to be honest, if they're able to, because he saved his week last week with the 2 touchdowns late. I think they just a slow start probably against Arizona, maybe some levels of, that we saw the weird story about their plane wasn't able to get out. And so it's kind of some things that probably contributed to starting slow against Arizona. I think probably trying to be intentional with the running back usage. And then
he also had that illness too. If you remember, he was like a game time. It wasn't just the calf. He also was dealing with a flu bug or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think they got to the point later in the game where they're basically like, okay, we have to go out here and win this, and like Josh Jacobs just kind of sucked it up and went out and won the game, and that kind of happened. But you would think that there's going to be a lot of energy coursing through both of these teams in this situation, given who's taking snaps for the Steelers. And while it's not in Lambeau, the Steelers coming off that loss to the Bengals and just probably not happy about that, and having Aaron Rodgers juiced up, and then the Packers knowing that they got off to a slow start last week and knowing who they're going up against. I think that this is going to be cinema. It's going to be exciting to see this one.
So I know there's a lot of wish casting for Matthew Golden, and we have seen little flashes here and there, but are you at the point where you're putting him ahead of Romeo Doubs in your ranking, or do you prefer Romeo Doubs ahead of Matthew Golden this week?
No, I've clearly Romeo Doubs. I think Romeo
Same.
Doubs has established himself as the go-to receiver within this offense. I know
We've been talking about this for weeks too. Like Romeo Doubs, like quietly really emerging this year as a go-to wide receiver 1.
Yeah, and it's you're not seeing like the 11 for 122 weeks out of him. It's that wide receiver one in this Packers offense is looking more like 6 for 60, but it's also it's I mean, the big play potential is more there for Golden, but at the same time, if I'm gonna bet on who's gonna get red zone targets, I'm going Romeo Dubs 10 times out of 10. So it's where the touchdown's gonna come from. If we can see Golden strike from deep, we saw last week. I mean, I'm playing both in positions that I got them because
Yeah.
we saw this Pittsburgh defense get really torched by the passing game of the Bengals last week.
And then I also want to talk about the Steelers here. Like the football nerd in me loves what the Steelers are doing, like operating out of base 12 personnel. We see the occasional 13, 14 personnel out there as well. Like we see DK Metcalf lining up as a fullback. Like Arthur Smith is just in his bag this year doing some really fun things. But for fantasy purposes, is there anybody that matters besides DK Metcalf and Jalen Warren? Because to me, like, yeah, we've got the occasional like Fryermuth blow up spot or a Darnell Washington blow up spot or Jonnu Smith blow up spot, but it feels like those are so hard to predict that like you can look at all of those guys theoretically as streamers if you're feeling really risky. But I think this is like DK Metcalf, Jalen Warren, and that's really all you can rely on.
Yeah, and we're not seeing I thought that we would get to a point where we would see the relationship with DK Metcalf and Aaron Rodgers blossom to where DK Metcalf was being targeted in similar ways that Devontae Adams was targeted in their time together. We're not seeing that, and maybe that's the Arthur Smith of the offense. But I mean, it's the perfect recipe for fantasy disaster when you've got Arthur Smith here and you're giving him nobody that's demanding targets, and so nobody gets targets. Everybody gets to touch the ball. Let's scheme how many creative ways that we can figure out how to get Cameron Hayward on a tight end reverse. What are we going to get like out of this week? And so I think they've done I poke at Arthur Smith quite a bit, but I think they have done a good job of leading into what they have here with Aaron Rodgers, molding the two offenses, and that short passing game. They love to go to that and involve everybody. And this is a Packers defense that, Jeff Hafley, they watched him close here at Ohio State. The way that he operated the defense here at Ohio State, similar to what he's doing with Green Bay, where it's really bend, don't break, let everything kind of happen beneath the coverage. And then we've got playmakers like Micah Parsons that in a big spot, Micah Parsons can come through and step up and make a play. Let's allow our Rashawn Gary and Micah Parsons to make big plays when we need them to. We're not going to give up big plays on the back end.
I think the interesting thing too is like we heard a couple weeks ago, Mike Tomlin, it seemed like he got to put his cards on the table where he was like, if we're playing a 3-4 defense, we're going to get Pat Fryermuth out there. And if we're playing a 4-3 defense, Pat Fryermuth's going to kind of be on the sidelines watching. And last week playing against the Bengals, a 4-3 defense for the most part, Pat Fryermuth had his biggest game of the year. So like, I want to listen to that and say, hey, the Packers operate out of a base 4-3 defense. We should probably bench Pat Fryermuth, but we saw him buck that trend last week against the Bengals. So I'm looking at all of these guys. Like, if I had to rank them, it would be Jonnu Smith, Fryermuth, and then Darnell Washington. But all of them are outside my top 15, meaning like if you're starting any of them, it's coming from a place of pure desperation. Last game of the week that we want to talk about here, Jeff, Monday Night Football.
I think it's worth mentioning Calvin Austin, though, because I think he's the clear wide receiver too for the Steelers, and they didn't have him the last couple of weeks. And I think the first week they tried to maybe get by with throwing some bodies out there at wide receiver. I think that what you saw with the Bengals was them saying, we don't have another wide receiver and we're just going to play the tight ends because we don't have another wide receiver. So let's put 4 tight ends out on the field at the same time. With Calvin Austin back in there, I do think that you'll get trending a little bit more towards traditional usage out of the tight ends and having 2 actual wide receivers on the field.
And it wasn't just last week. When they played the Browns 2 weeks ago, it was the same thing. That's when we saw them opening up the game in 13 personnel and a big shot up the middle to Darnell Washington. And I almost wonder, like, to me, like, I feel like this is what Arthur Smith wants to operate out of, is this tight end rich offense where, you got tight ends leading the group in targets and then running backs number 2 in targets and then just like a little dash for the wide receivers. But then you also see DK Metcalf lining up in line and lining up as a fullback. Interested to see what it looks like with Calvin Austin back in the mix, because I feel like Arthur Smith has enjoyed what he's done the last couple of weeks. We'll see how much Calvin Austin is involved, but we've also seen DK Metcalf, his role changed a lot when Calvin Austin when Calvin Austin wasn't on the field. When Calvin Austin was out there, he was the one running the deep routes and getting the deep targets while DK Metcalf was working underneath. When Calvin Austin was out of the game, then we saw DK Metcalf start running much deeper. His ADOT went up in those games. So it'll be interesting to see if he does get pushed back into that role. We'll see how that shakes out. But last game of the week, Monday Night Football, Washington Commanders at Kansas City Chiefs. Injuries here. We've got Jaden Daniels not practicing. Marcus Mariota is going to get the start again. Zach Ertz got a rest day. Terry McLaurin back to a full participation at practice after we haven't seen him for the last month. Deebo Samuel also practicing in full with this heel injury that's plagued him for the last couple of weeks. Kareem Hunt didn't practice, dealing with an ankle and a knee injury. Rashard Smith practicing in full, and Xavier Worthy also practicing in full. Jeff, this would have been a really awesome matchup, but unfortunately, injuries are kind of zapping some of the fun out here without Jaden Daniels. What are you going to be paying closest attention to in this one?
I think making sure that we feel good that Kareem Hunt is not going to play, because I think if we feel good that Kareem Hunt's not going to play, I think it opens up for both Isaiah Pacheco and Rashad Smith to be fantasy relevant starts, depending on where you're sitting with your running backs this week. If Kareem Hunt starts to trend towards, maybe it looks like he's going to be active, I would have a lot more trepidation about where I'm going to go in particular with Brashard Smith, starting Brashard Smith. I think that I'm feeling pretty good about where Isaiah Pacheco has been trending the last couple of weeks. I've said for the last couple of weeks, he looks like he's the best running back that the Chiefs have. And I know the Twitter space is way on the Brashard Smith train. And I hear you, but I think that Isaiah Pacheco has looked really good the last couple of weeks, and he was trending back towards being that lead running back there. The blowout last week allowed Brashard Smith to get some opportunities, and it was exciting because Brashard Smith actually looked like a running back for the first time this year. He hadn't really been used as a running back. He'd been a creative outlet out of the backfield to create targets there. Just kind of seeing how operational is this Chiefs Death Star now that we've got all the pieces in here. Can the Commanders with Marcus Mariota at quarterback push them enough that we can get a full game of all the Chiefs funness, because it does feel like 6 touchdown passes are in play for Patrick Mahomes, everybody going off. It also feels like a repeat of last week is potential here, where the Chiefs just blow them out and it is over at halftime, and you're just kind of looking and watching the second half here where, maybe Pacheco, maybe Worthy is your Monday night start and they didn't get the touchdown in the first half, and you're thinking, all right, just 4 more points. All we need is 4 more points the second half, and you're just watching in horror as they're not even on the field. And yeah.
Let me ask you, Jeff. Where do you have Xavier Worthy ranked this week?
Where do I have Xavier Worthy ranked this week? Right now, I have Xavier Worthy. If I was doing an actual professional show and had my wide receiver ranks up, I would tell you that I have Xavier Worthy, wide receiver 18 for me right now. Or wide receiver 19, I'm sorry. Wide receiver 19.
So I've got him wide receiver 25, so we're very much so in the same range. And I think what we saw last week, and I know a lot of people don't want to hear this because there were very high expectations for Xavier Worthy, but he was back to running those deep routes again. And Rashee Rice is just that guy across the middle of the field. I mean, I got Rashee Rice as my wide receiver 2 on the week. I've got him ahead of CeeDee Lamb. The only person I prefer ahead of Rashee Rice is Jamar Chase. I mean, we just saw him. Like, he went right back into the role that he was. There was no slowing down from that. I mean, this guy had like 10 targets in the first half. Like, they didn't even have to put the foot on the gas in the second half. And Rashee Rice had a huge blow-up week. And I think so many of those creative, fun touches that we saw go in Xavier Worthy's way over the second half of last year and the beginning of this year, the end arounds, the jet sweeps, the screens, the slants, I think that is just all Rashee Rice now. So I think Xavier Worthy still has an immense ceiling, and he's going to get a handful of these touches. But I think that we're looking at what Xavier Worthy did more at the first half of last year, where he was playing kind of that deep threat, the guy who can get behind defenses. I don't think there's going to be a lot of volume there anymore. So still starting him as a very high ceiling wide receiver 2, but I do worry that his floor now with Rashee Rice there is much, much lower.
Yeah, I probably want to see a couple games here before I'm going to be too definitive on it, because I think you can make the argument, devil's advocate argument, of saying Rashee Rice has been out for over a year. He's been healthy. He's been sitting on the sidelines, and walking into that game last week, they said, it's Rashee Rice time. Like, let's go.
Oh, yeah.
This is your week, man. Let's get you.
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
get you rolling. Let's like get you feeling good. And then, maybe coming off that, you say, okay, well, we neglected Xavier a little bit last week. Let's get Xavier
Mhm.
going again. And like, are you going to play this game of like, we're going to, we want everybody to be happy, everybody to be up and rolling? Or is it it's everything is Rasheed Rice is our superstar and everybody plays off of him? I think I'm hesitant to bury, and I've seen some places that are absolutely burying Xavier Worthy at this point. And Rasheed Rice is my wide receiver 3 on the week. So I hear you there. I think the ceiling is high enough for this Chiefs offense that both can get there and be very, very fantasy relevant. I'm very hesitant to just bury Worthy off of one game where they didn't even have to try in the second half. And I
Fair.
think
Yeah.
walking in, it was intentional to get Rasheed Rice going. I think that you can make both arguments here where you can say Rasheed Rice is the Amon-Ra St. Brown of this offense. He's going to eat every single week regardless. And Xavier Worthy is the Jameson Williams now where, some weeks he'll have some big weeks and other weeks he won't do much of anything. Or you can say, I think that Xavier Worthy is still an elite high-end talent, and they were intentional with Rasheed Rice. They built a lead. They didn't have to go to some of their other pieces. And as you get to some more balance throughout the season, both give you high upside.
Yep. I said the Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams comp. I said that on yesterday's show with Alfredo Brown when we were talking through
You
our
do a
wide
good job,
receiver
Dave.
rankings. Yeah, I mean, it makes too much sense. It's exactly what Rashee Rice does. And I think the difference is, well, I wouldn't even say the difference because we do see every once in a while, they will run that end around to Jameson Williams or they'll throw a slant to Jameson Williams. And I think you'll get that every now and then from Xavier Worthy, but maybe once or twice a game as opposed to the 4 to 6 times per game we were seeing sans Rashee Rice. Jeff, we did it. Kind of funny. This ended up being one of our longer shows, despite 6 teams on bye, but much to discuss and always a fun way to just kind of lock in and get ready for the upcoming slate of games. So, any final thoughts on this week before we sign off today?
Yeah, I mean, we're all dealing with buys. And so I think it's important to recognize that you can be frustrated when you're looking at your lineup with the buys and the injuries of who you're going to play. And just your opponent is feeling the same frustration when they're looking at their lineup of, context on it. I really dug in yesterday to get my lineup set before Thursday Night Football. And I was like laughing at myself of how many starts I was making or like where I kind of stood in positions. And then I got out of it and I looked at my matchup and I was still projected to win. And I was like, oh, they must be really going through it on the other end too. So I think that's just a big part of it of like, everybody's dealing with the bipocalypse. Everybody's dealing with injuries. Don't
You
be
say that,
discouraged.
Jeff. I'm looking at my home league right now. I have Jahmyr Gibbs, Brian Thomas Jr., Jameson Williams, Kyron Williams, Brock Bowers, Travis Hunter on bye, and my opponent has Trey Tucker on bye. So I'm going to call you out for that one. Sometimes
And
the
they probably
opponents
aren't
are
very
dealing
good,
with that.
Dave. They probably don't have very good players if they're not on bye this week.
Yeah, no, I'm projected to lose by about 40 points in this one, so hoping I can at least squeak out maybe a median win playing against one of the best teams.
Okay,
in the
Dave.
league
So
with
just
nobody on bye.
remember that you stacked all your buys in week 8 purposely this summer because you knew that you were going to take it on the chin in week 8 and you were going to have a super strong roster through the
That's
rest
it.
of your matchups. So just recognize that in August, you made this decision to get to this week and say, I'm going to lose this week because I'm going to win every other week. And so, if the everybody's not dealing with buys doesn't do it for you, just recognize you made a conscious decision to have an awful week of buys and suck it up and deal with it and just move on.
Everything is going just as planned. When I was drafting this team in August, I was saying, I can't wait to start Tajay Spears, Travion Henderson, Jalen Knoll, Dalton Schultz, and Marvin Mims in week 8. That's exactly what I'm hoping for. But hey, we're doing our best out here, and hopefully some of these guys can find pay dirt. This is a fun week. I like buys. It really stretches, what we want to do and the guys that we're looking at, and a really good time of year. But this will be it for the weekend. I sign off from content on Friday afternoons. No more shows until next week. You can find me over at footballguys.com/news. I will be updating our newswire for the rest of the day as we get more information about Friday practices, who's in, who's out, who's doubtful, who's questionable. I will be updating all of that footballguys.com/news. So be sure to check that out. I want to thank you all so much for taking the time to tune in today. We would not be able to do this without you, the audience, taking the time to listen. So thank you so much. Best of luck this weekend, and we will see you next week.